All right, perfect. So we are going to jump right in, and we're going to spend a couple minutes telling you guys who we are. But first, we kind of wanted to get an idea of who you are. So we're starting off with a question today, and that's really just where are you on your risk and compliance journey today? And this is a question that we typically ask a lot of our clients as we're starting to get to know them, trying to figure out how we could best help them. Is this something where you've just started? Has something happened? A lot of our clients are now talking to us based on COVID and how the impact that is happening to them and what they're having to do in order to do that. Is it something where you're very mature and now you're just trying to figure out how to better fine tune? So you have all the base elements in place and now you're trying to really just fine tune it to really meet the needs of the organization and get those reports that you're looking for. So I'm going to give this just a couple more seconds and then we're going to jump right into the results. I would play some Jeopardy music, but I do not have any on standby. So just another 10 seconds or so. All right, let's see where everybody's at. So it looks like the vast majority are up and running, but it's not fully integrated, which is good. We're going to talk through a lot of that today. And then very manual and some early technology being developed. Not surprisingly, that fifth question is something that a lot of people get to, but it's something that usually it's something where you have that drive in the organization or you have that leader that's really pushing it because it's his or her agenda and something that they want to wind up really going with. So today, to that end, we're going to talk through how your risk management teams can collaborate better and specifically how you can help with getting rid of audit fatigue. We're going to walk through a healthcare provider use case with actionable risk management insights. And then finally, we're going to talk through some of those tangible ways so that you can get from the 1s, 2s into the 3, 4s, and even 5s. With that said, this is Cliff Harris. I'm the person that's talking. I work for ServiceNow, and I'm an SME in risk, and I focus mainly in the med-sled area. And Greg, I'll pass it to you to do an introduction on yourself.
Great. Thanks, Cliff. Hey, everyone. My name is Greg Liebergen. I'm the director here at Edgile, and I'm focused on helping our clients operationalize their IRM programs using ServiceNow. I've been in the business about 10 years. I've been working for the Big Four. I've worked at a large multi-state healthcare provider, and I'm now with Edgile. And I'm excited to be here and chat with everyone today. For those on the line that aren't familiar with Edgile, we're often referred to as a boutique Big Four firm. And we're focused exclusively on 3 different service offerings. So we have identity and access management, largely with SailPoint, cloud security, largely with Microsoft, and then our IRM practice, which is exclusively with ServiceNow. So with that, I will pass it off to Beth and let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Greg. My name is Beth Lowen. I'm the GRC practice manager for Edgile. I come from a lengthy healthcare career, having worked for several large integrated healthcare systems on the development of actionable risk management strategies. I look forward to talking with you today about some of those strategies. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gordon to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. This is Gordon Hazard. I'm one of our lead ServiceNow solution architects in the IRM practice. Got a little over 5 years in the industry, and today I'll be demoing and bringing to life a portion of the case study that we'll be highlighting. And with that, I will turn it back over to Cliff.
All right, we have turned everything over multiple times now. I like it. Everybody's up and running. All right, realistically, I'm going to do just a couple slides on ServiceNow. I assume most of the people who are joining at least have a base understanding, but for those that don't, ServiceNow only does one thing. We make work easier. That is our only focus, our only objective. We really cut out anything that gets in the way of that vision, and that's the standard that we ask to be held accountable to. So it all starts with the Now platform. Single data model, everything is on top of this. We have a store that allows you to go out and see what integrations are there. And the best thing is we consider ourselves to be the platform of platforms. We want to integrate in. We want to share data out. We want to make sure that we are the hub that you're able to come to make your life easier. And we do that with a lot of really cool things. Virtual agents that allow you to have natural language talking. You're able to go through and have some guided tours. You have a service portals that make it easier for your first line to come in, especially if they only have a control they test once a year. And then we also have different things such as a mobile experience that's equivalent to what you can get from a desktop. Absolutely amazing platform. And then as things happen on the platform, each of the individual disciplines are winding up benefiting. And when we look at those disciplines, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to highlight a few. Most people know us for our ticketing, which we call our IT service management. If I wanted a new laptop, I would log into our own version of it and put in a ticket to get a new laptop. But we also do things like HR onboarding. We do a lot of security to include orchestration. We do some ITBM, managing your projects. We also do things such as customer service management. So anything that has a workflow behind it is something that we're doing either through one of our defined disciplines or business units here, or by going through and doing custom tables that allow you to really just expand the platform to do anything you want it to do. And I'm trying not to take too much time here, so I'm going to jump into specific to what IRM does. I'm going to give you a quick sentence or two on each one of these, and then I'll pass it on and we can really start getting into the meat of what we're here to talk about today. We have 8 core things we do within the IRM platform. The first is going to be policy management. This is publishing policies, attesting to policies, requesting exceptions from policies. So everything you do to publish a policy and then how your users either accept it or request exception from it, that's in policy. Compliance, I'm sure everybody on the call is pretty familiar with this one. This is test controls based off of regulatory authorities and or internal controls that you want to maintain. So ask one question, have it apply to multiple standards. We're going to get into that a lot today. Risk management, that's where we're going to wind up either doing top-down assessments where you have an understanding of your risk and then you're maintaining your indicators if that risk is going up or down, or if you're looking to identify risk through different assessments of your business units, your processes, your applications, your different areas, if you will. Business continuity is probably the most straightforward one here. That is how you're going to wind up having a business continuity disaster recovery plan, as well as crisis management in the case that one of those plans needs to be activated. Vendor risk is the due diligence that you need to do in order to bring a vendor on. So do you want to do a financial due diligence? Do you want to see if they're having a SOC 2? Different things that you would want to do in order to feel comfortable with the vendor. Internal audit. Our audit is really based for internal audit shops that allow you to go through and perform audits, define your auditable universe, define who you're going to wind up auditing, and then tracking those audits. Privacy is how you're going to go through and do some things such as DPIAs and complying with CCPA, GDPR, etc. And the 8th one that's not really listed here is everything that our partners are doing. And it absolutely blows my mind just because I feel like we've almost given a box of Legos to a lot of our partners, and they've built these amazing things with them. It's almost like watching Chopped in real life. And with that, one of the things that we're really going to talk to is what Edgile specifically has done with the platform to really take it beyond the initial use case and make it very specific to medical, but also just to allow everybody who potentially has a use case here to realize that vision based on some of the things that they've developed and put out on our storefront. If you go to store.servicenow.com, you will see Edgile splashed all over it, and with good reason. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Greg so that he can start talking through some of those provider case studies.
Thanks, Cliff. So as Cliff mentioned, we want to talk through healthcare provider case study today, and we're going to talk about how we help alleviate 4 pain points. So the first topic that we're going to cover is around better reporting, and that involves making sure that our message is on point and it resonates with executive leaders and the board, and it helps them understand, what risks and compliance postures are across the organization. We're also going to discuss using smarter KPIs to talk about our leading indicators rather than backward-looking lagging indicators. The second topic that we'll cover is around audit fatigue. We're going to touch on some of the techniques that we've used with our clients to avoid that audit fatigue and then really achieve the assess once, test once, and satisfy many objective. Then we'll move on to healthcare compliance, where we're going to look at how we've helped our clients with their grievance and incident management process. We'll talk about how we've helped change the way our clients approach control owners so that they're acting as a coach rather than an audit adversary through positive assurance. And we'll talk about some of the leading compliance reporting techniques. lastly, we're going to make this all sustainable by automating decisioning. We'll talk about how we've allowed organizations to remove ambiguity, miss email handoffs, and then run closed-loop processes with workflows to demonstrate how automated decisions can address the challenges. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in and start talking about better reporting right away. So there's some simple quick hit areas we want to focus on to improving reporting. The first is on an annual basis, organizations should look at updating their materiality threshold as the business grows and then recalibrate their financial loss tolerance to adjust for the larger size of their business. They should also be reviewing risk appetite and reviewing their tolerance levels to make sure that they understand what cash reserves are available and what insurance vehicles they have access to. And that helps understand where they can take on certain risks, but then also it helps kind of give a picture of where we should be avoiding risks throughout the organization. The second thing that we want to cover here is being more specific. We need to help users in the field better understand the definitions and the criteria around their impact and likelihood, and then speak in measurable periods of time. So these couple topics here are really going to help us accomplish these reporting quick hits. The next thing I want to talk about is our business hierarchy. One of the main objectives with reporting is to ensure that we have accountability and the right level of insight. And that insight needs to span the different layers and pillars from the business hierarchy perspective, but then also go down into the applications. We want to be able to slice and dice the data in a way that is providing clear visibility of all our risks across the portfolio, but then also talk about how those different risks flow up and down between the organizations and applications. As we've worked with our clients, one of the big blind spots that we've seen, it tends to be ensuring that they have an up-to-date business hierarchy. So we've worked with our clients using advanced techniques in ServiceNow to automatically update that hierarchy, as well as the ownership of their different organizational units and the applications that live within it. Having that updating hierarchy helps improve reporting and then management's visibility into where potential exposure points exist in the organization. So the next piece is the executive risk dashboard. We want to make sure that, as we're moving through that journey, that we're providing quick wins. The wins should be at a rolled up management level, and that they should have a consistent, easy to understand roll-up points. We should want to address qualitative and quantitative ratings. We want to understand where we were at before we implemented safeguards, or what our inherent risk was, and then where we are at after safeguards are in place, the residual risk. We want to be able to provide a summary as well so that we can see where investments are paying off, but then where we need to continue focusing and investing in the future. So on a personal note with this, when I worked at the healthcare provider, I shared this type of dashboard with my leader, who then in turn shared it with our board of directors. And after seeing this dashboard, and after about 18 months of making investments, the board was actually finally able to start to understand where we were reducing risk across the organization, but then also starting to understand where they needed to make longer-term investments so that they could reduce the risk level to the point that it was deemed acceptable for the organization.
So, Greg, quick question for you on that. Is this using the content that came here? I know that this is something you guys have done for a few clients. Are you using the client or the data that you have out on the store that's industry specific here, or how did you do that?
Yeah, absolutely, Cliff. So this is built on what we call our automated regulatory compliance content, or ARC content. And essentially what that is it's using 550 different laws and regulations, and we've harmonized them. But we've done the hard work and we've cut it down into industry-specific content packs so that our clients don't have to sift through all of the laws and regulations that aren't applicable to their business. And what we do is we map that to a single spine, so that enables this reporting using kind of the different risk categories of the 6 items that you see on the right side. And then there's 26 different risk topics, or kind of the smaller rectangles towards the middle of the slide. So that enables that consistent roll-up point that I mentioned, and makes it easy for our clients to be able to continuously reproduce this type of report.
That makes sense.
So, this report is great, but as we continue to mature, you're going to have different techniques and different sources of data that are used to inform the executive dashboard. And so you'll see that over time, we want to increase our reliance on higher confidence techniques, such as control testing and our KPI monitoring to help improve the dashboards. a And talking about KPIs, we want to make sure that we're using smarter KPIs. So there's a few rules that we tend to follow. When we see our clients start their journey, they were often falling into the trap of using raw numbers as opposed to percentages or percentage increases to show different movement and scale. They tend to use poorly defined metrics, and they're using data that's readily available, which tends to be misleading and potentially a waste of time to collect and maintain that data. So to increase your risk insight, we want to focus on overemphasizing our leading or neutral indicators where we can, rather than focusing on backward-looking lagging indicators. To look at things such as the percentage of new regulations or different mergers and acquisition activity that would have increased our application footprint that we now have to get in line with our controls. So you want to look at specific metrics that are formally defined, and then we want to hone in on the things that really matter in a material way and make sure we're really getting them right. It's better to have fewer KPIs if we're doing them well, rather than having too many that are poor indicators and really don't give the message that we need to. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Beth and let her talk through the audit fatigue.
Thank you, Greg. And now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into how ServiceNow can be used to address the overwhelming nature of audit fatigue. What we found is that clients really want to do the right thing, but it's hard for them to understand what exactly needs to be done. A lot of the time, clients are just given policies and standards, and they're not sure how that actually relates to the given operating environment. And moreover, how to smooth out the language and the expectations from both those policies and standards, as well as other laws and regulations. The technique to address that is really a baseline control and a baseline test procedure. They're offered in pairs, so the expectations are very clear, and you're able to right-size them by carving out the priority mandates for different enclaves of environments. Whether they're data-driven, like cardholder data or EPHI-covered data, or in other cases, financial data, being able to carve those out and right-size the controls and provide that guidance to the field, as well as to provide the expectations of how management will get comfort that those controls are in place and operating effectively, is extremely valuable. As many of you know, the holy grail that we're all seeking is the ability to assess once, test once, and satisfy many. Historically, this has been a very painful process, and there are a lot of inefficiencies that have been identified. The field is fatigued, and they're complaining that we're effectively providing the same evidence to multiple assurance requests, whether they're internal audits, external audits, PCI readiness, HIPAA compliance, what have you. It effectively gets down to many of the same controls in the same areas. What we've helped our clients do is to create what is called an evidence warehouse. It has evidence boxes for specific asset and control areas to then empower the field to be able to reuse that evidence and understand and run those campaigns to make sure that evidence is being gathered proactively and on a reoccurring basis for your plan. Now I'm going to hand it over to Gordon so he can demonstrate the evidence warehouse capabilities.
Perfect. Thank you, Beth. I'm going to go ahead and share out my screen here. All right, I believe it is sharing. So yes, exactly as Beth was talking about, whether that be your internal audit team, and perhaps you're getting ready to build out some SOC 2 reports for some of the customers you do business with, or maybe it's a PCI or regulation-specific audit. And so you're going to have a lot of these different engagements in these audits that you're going to have to respond to throughout the course of time. And perhaps in this case right here in this example, many at once, which can place a very large burden on the business. And so within ServiceNow, underneath the audit module, these would be handled through what's called an engagement. And so an engagement is really just that engine to drive some of those control testing efforts and validation efforts. And so if we were to look into here, each one of those engagements that we're going to have to respond to over the next coming months is going to have a variety of different control tests that need to be performed. So it's going to be scoped down to a particular set of systems and controls, and we're going to have to actually evaluate those things. And to make matters even worse for us, not only is this PCI engagement right here going to be testing and evaluating these controls for a few set systems, there's going to be another SOC 2 engagement that's basically doing very similar things with a slightly different scope, but there's going to be tons of overlap. And so as these sorts of engagements and testing campaigns start to combine and overlap with each other, you're going to be hitting those same stakeholders, those same control owners multiple times for the same artifacts and evidence. The control is one control, right? But we're testing it multiple times, and we're having to reload the same screenshot into the platform. It just becomes a burden and cumbersome. And so this is really where Evidence Warehouse comes into play and can start to help alleviate some of that fatigue on the business by allowing you to collect all of those artifacts and prepare ahead of time. That way you're only doing those exercises once and enabling that power to just link it through the platform to where you need it, so it's there in time for the test and you're not having to collect it as you go. And so that's what we're going to walk through today, is how you would go about building one of those evidence boxes, some of the features available there, and then just how it links into those control tests and really provides that value and time saving with that. And so this Evidence Warehouse is an application within ServiceNow. It's got a variety of modules. And so it's pretty much like you would expect a real-life evidence warehouse to be, but in a virtual sense, right? So we have an evidence warehouse that contains a whole bunch of these different boxes, and then these boxes will all serve a singular purpose in providing a place to collect those evidence pieces and artifacts for a particular system. For example, let's just say like your Access Active Directory. You could have a variety of applications, databases, other sorts of tools that all use Active Directory for authentication purposes. And so rather than having to, pull each one of those teams individually, you can get that common control evidence from Active Directory and then link it to those applications and be able to provide that. Similarly, in this case, we're going to be going through that logging and monitoring example to where you could have a variety of systems using the same SIM tool or other logging capabilities as well. And so with that, we have right here the evidence box, and it really comes down to just a few different phases. So there's an empty, which is that initial, we're just starting to prepare the evidence box. We're setting up all of the details, assigning the appropriate folks. There's the collection phase. This is where we're actually going to go out and collect those artifacts and link them to the evidence box. There's the review stage where we can indicate that, okay, we need someone, whether that be from the information security team, maybe there's that second line of control, like in that financial setting, to go in and validate that this evidence is accurate and what we need it to be before we can present it to put it in use with those audits. And then once everything has been signed off, ready, then we enter this prepared state. So in this state, we've collected everything, we have it ready to go, but we aren't actually using it yet in the environment. There's the supplied state, so this is where everything essentially gets locked down because we've provided it to one of those control tests or to one of those engagements. So now this is an active evidence box that we're using in the environment, and we've actually supplied it to support or fulfill some of our testing obligations. And then there's this archival state. So once this evidence, maybe this was 2020 evidence and now it's 2021, we still need to maintain a record of this because it's, some of the control tests and things they performed, we need to have a record of that and for data retention purposes. So this is when it's in the archive state. We archive the evidence box. It's still here. It's still read-only and available for visibility, but we're no longer going to actively supply this to new control tests and engagements coming up. And so that's kind of the general structure and layout of the life cycle of this evidence box. And so we can begin to provide it a name. We can specify who we want to collect the evidence. We can assign that to individuals, or we can check this box and that'll flip over to groups. We can indicate who the owner of this evidence box is, so who's owning the process for making sure this information gets collected. There's this requires review, yes, no. And what this is going to do is essentially dictate whether or not we can kind of self-attest that, okay, this evidence is good, then we can advance straight from collection to prepared, or whether that review step we were talking about would be needed. Then on the schedule tab, these read-only fields will kind of calculate that time from when we first start collecting until we move to that prepared state. So this just gives you some metrics and feedback of how long are these things taking to gather. And then over here to the right, this is some more life cycle related items. So we collect evidence. At what point in time do we want to start recollecting this evidence? So let's just say this evidence, it's for 2020. Maybe we want to start recollecting and jumpstart the process. So maybe November 2nd, that first Monday in November, we want to generate a new evidence box, increment it a version, and start to get the fresh data. And similarly, this archival date is somewhat acting as like an expiration date. So this is the point in time which the evidence box will automatically transition from that supplied state to that archived state, just letting folks know that, hey, this is an evidence box that we've used, but we can no longer use it for our upcoming engagements. And then on this review tab, we'll have the ability to designate who we want to be that reviewer. There's a details tab that can kind of show who created this evidence box, give it a version, and then if there was a previous version, so like 2019, it could be linked directly from here. And then an activity log to keep track of everything that's been changing. And then down below, here's where we can start to link this evidence box to other areas in the GRC platform to which it applies. So for this logging and monitoring example, we've already pre-linked it here to some of the policies that are applicable. Maybe in this case, it's for our applications. So we've linked both of these systems to this evidence box, and we pulled in the corresponding controls for where it applies. So here's the logging and monitoring controls for some of those applications. And so through the process of linking these things, and some of this can be performed automatically. So if we wanted to say link the corresponding entities for these two controls down here, this one will be for the operating system, this one for a database. We can go ahead and we can link those related entities. It's going to let us know that occurred. And then sure enough, if we go back to our related list, it will show up there. So really these different control objectives, controls, these are just records from that policy and compliance management module that Cliff was referencing earlier. And if you're familiar with the ServiceNow GRC IRM platform, those should be somewhat familiar. And so these really just allow that tie-in for, okay, what does this evidence box relate to from a compliance perspective? For what systems, what controls can we actually use this? And so the next step would be to actually go ahead and generate those collection tasks. And so by clicking that button, it's going to generate a task for each one of these collectors, in this case, John Adams and Able Tutor. They will show up here down in this related list. I'm going to open one of these in a new tab. And so if I open up this collection task, there's the ability through some properties to set some default test instructions. You can specify what type of thing you're going to be collecting. Maybe we're collecting audit reports, configuration settings, could be a system screenshot. You can set a timeline for how long you want to give the person to complete the task. So you would set these things up. And I'm going to go ahead and just save it here. And it's saved in this draft state. So it's draft. It's not showing up their queue. John hasn't got a notification yet. It's just letting him know, or it's just allowing the person who's driving this evidence box to set up, okay, here are the things that we need. We can specify things like, what specific system report we need, or what screenshot, or we can start to narrow the details down. And really just set up, okay, here's the collection campaign, so to speak. And then once we've adequately prepared all of our collection tasks, there's a button here to begin collection. So if we click that, it's going to advance us from this empty to this collection state. It's going to indicate our collection start time. And if we go back to our collection task, it actually advanced this state to open. So if I refresh the page here, it's now in that open state. Then John will get that notification. So to log in with a link to this collection task, he'd be able to see the details. And then through, when he's ready to start working on it, he would click Work in Progress. and then he would be able to directly add some documents to this task. So it's using ServiceNow's kind of drag and drop. We said system screenshots, so here's some system screenshots. We can attach them here. And so we just uploaded some attachments. And then when we're ready to close this out, we can indicate close complete. And what that's going to do is it's actually just going to replicate these attachments to this evidence box. So if we refresh this list, we should see all 3 of them, or in this case 5, there was 2 ahead of time. So we see that those attachments got added to this evidence box. And so as they're completing their tasks, all those get complete. I'll just go ahead and update this one directly. The end user wouldn't be able to do this. I'm just an administrator right now, but it's close complete. And so now we are ready to begin the review process. So the owner of this evidence box would see that all of those tasks are close complete. They would request a review. And this is where that reviewer, in this case Thomas Jefferson, would be able to log in and review the attachments. He would have access to see these tasks. If there's any work notes or things to evaluate there, he could. And then he can either enter comments, or he has to enter comments. He can either say, it looks good, or if they needed to update some things, he could make that note and send it back to collection. But if it looks good, we'll mark this evidence box as prepared. And what that indicates, it's going to lock down. You notice that paperclip attachment thing went away. So these attachments are locked in place on this record. We cannot modify them. I'm logged in as an administrator. I can't even touch them while it's in this state. And while it's still prepared and it hasn't been supplied, there's the option to send it back to collection. But once we start to supply it to the organization, you can't modify it. It's going to be in that supplied state, and it's kind of solidified, and it's really maintaining that chain of custody and keeping everything constant. But now what we've done is we've walked through, how do we collect the evidence? We've collected it. We've reviewed it, we've prepared it, it's ready to use. Now, how does this kind of translate back into that audit world we were talking about in the first place? And so if we were to go back to one of those engagements, I just had it open in a new tab here. So this is that PCI control testing engagement. Some of those systems that we said this evidence box applies to were, those applications and the database and operating system. And so we want to go ahead and link that evidence box to this engagement so that we can start to use it on our control tests. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight all of these entities, and you could, specify I only want to link evidence boxes from these 4 systems. But we're basically saying with this button, link all of the evidence boxes in our evidence warehouse that are prepared or supplied, ready to be used, that are related to these systems to this engagement. So we can go ahead and we can link those. In this case, we had 4 that were there. So if we just refresh this list, all 4 of those evidence boxes are going to show up. So we had some system backup evidence and PCI specific stuff, and then our logging and monitoring evidence. And if for some reason, if we didn't want to include some of our SOC 2 evidence in this one, we would be able to edit this list and remove that SOC 2 evidence. So we could just backtrack that, remove it. And so now we just isolated our scope to the evidence that we want for this engagement. Similarly, we can also check which ones of these we want to include and start to link directly to our control test records. And so by clicking this button, it's going to search through these associated evidence boxes at all of these controls. And each time there's a control test in this engagement that's associated to these controls. So if there's a control test for audit trail retention on application 2, it's going to go ahead and attach this evidence box there so that it can be used. And so I'm going to click this button. It's going to link it. So all 3 of these got linked to 21 different control tests. And I kind of pre-looked at what those ones would be. And so here's one of those control tests. And sure enough, here's that evidence box. In this case, it's that PCI evidence. There's an evidence box linked to this control test based off of what we just did there. And so really, where this adds that value and helps eliminate that fatigue is if I'm the user assigned to complete this control test, and through the course of those engagements, there's going to be hundreds of these things, right? There's hundreds of controls, many systems. I don't have to go through the effort of reattaching, looking up, capturing that screenshot again, and repeating it both for this control test, but also for the one for the SOC 2 report, or for maybe that PCI assessment. I can already have this evidence box right here with all the attachments that are needed. The user can directly click on this link, access the evidence box and all of its artifacts right away. And they can start to just go ahead and perform their test. They can look at the expectations, the assessment procedures. They can examine the evidence. They don't have to wait for that to be collected. And they can start to indicate, their effectiveness ratings, okay, this is ineffective, what have you, and start to perform their control test right away. You can capture those results, and you don't have to go through those repetitive steps of recapturing the evidence. So hopefully this gave you a good picture of kind of the evidence warehouse, how some of the ways it can eliminate that audit fatigue and really help make the business and the information security side in particular run more efficiently. So I'm going to stop sharing here and hand it back over to Beth.
Thank you, Gordon. Now we're going to unpack some solutions for specific healthcare compliance pain points. The first is a grievance portal to capture complaint data. We need an ability to have an externally facing intake portal, as well as an internally facing intake portal for a variety of grievances and fraud, waste, and abuse incidents to be reported, which oftentimes will be wired into an anonymous hotline. We then need the ability to workflow out that case management and likewise report from a dashboard perspective, both on the performance of our program, as well as the results and resolution of those various grievances. As I stated earlier, the control owners generally want to do the right thing. They're just simply unaware of what that looks like. And so we need to provide the tools and empower the owners to go out and perform the controls. One of the extremely powerful capabilities of ServiceNow is the ability to send out work tickets, fulfillment tasks, whereby you're reminding the control owners when they need to go review, say, their firewall rule sets, or when they need to go review and perform specific vulnerability scans on perhaps their cardholder data environment. And so instead of this being an adversarial relationship where an audit or compliance review is checking to see if it was done, you're getting ahead of it, you're reminding them, and then using a closed-loop process to capture the results. So it's all ready when those compliance reviews come around. Now I'm going to hand it back to Gordon to discuss some techniques to automate decisioning.
Thank you, Beth. Yep. So lastly, we're going to talk about the automated decisioning portion, which can be an extremely powerful tool in a variety of ways. It can help us optimize and reduce friction in our processes. It'll help us improve the quality and consistency in our ratings when we're classifying various systems and applications. And it'll also help us understand where some processes may be becoming stuck, they could be becoming delayed, or even just burdensome on the business. So it's identifying those pain points. And really, there's three techniques that we want to highlight in terms of automating those features. And the first one's around scoring. So as we're building out our attestations, our surveys, diagnostics, some of our GRC assessments, there's going to be certain questions that would clearly indicate a high risk or a low risk exposure. And a smart scoring model can help us quickly identify what levels of scrutiny will be required for that particular system or application. So for example, let's say we have an application, it's processing a high volume of protected health information or financial data. An intelligent scoring model can help us sift through those responses and flag this application as one that's going to need a more in-depth evaluation due to that higher data classification rating. And likewise, there's going to be controls where if they aren't in place would be absolute showstoppers. For example, not having firewalls on our internet-facing web servers or not having encryption on a database with PCI information. In those situations, we would want to automatically generate an issue or a finding in order to jumpstart that adjudication resolution process and get out in front of the challenge. And then lastly, coupling these models with a formal decision engine and an intake process will allow us to ensure that every project, system, vendor, application that's being pursued by the organization is being appropriately classified and managed, especially when we're incorporating classification criteria from multiple stakeholder groups throughout the organization. So when we include the criteria from folks in privacy, legal, maybe enterprise architecture, IRM, IT, bring all of those stakeholder groups together to form this process, will be able to allow us to understand the classification ratings and requirements for every project and system crossing the line up front, and will provide us a proactive way to set up some consultations and some fulfillment tasks so that different groups like the privacies and legals of the world can get in there and establish, what types of data privacy requirements and security controls must be in place up front. So we're getting ahead of the challenge, being more proactive rather than reactive to systems that are already in place in the environment. And so this slide really just shows a high-level picture, the concept of operations or how that might be achieved. It's a 5-step process. Up front, you have that initial step to identify the application or system workload that's being built. Step 2, the stakeholders involved, whether that be the business owner, the project sponsor of that application, they would go ahead and they would start to fill out that integrated questionnaire that's incorporating all that feedback and that information from the variety of groups. And then as an outcome of that questionnaire in step 3, you have clearly defined classification ratings so that everyone's on the same page and it's well known exactly what data sensitivity, resiliency, RPO, RTOs are going to be necessary for this system based off of your requirements from the various areas. And then in step 4 and 5 are really, the responses to those classification ratings. So we may need to set up some consultations with the application security team just to make sure that they have their chance to perform a review. We might need to do things like a vendor risk assessment or run a vulnerability scan. So setting up these interactions with those other stakeholder groups up front ensures everyone necessary is involved and consulted and all parties are at the same table and agreeing on what's been classified. And so this whole closed loop process, the questionnaire, the subsequent tasks and consultations really will ultimately provide that comfort that this application or system that's being implemented or introduced into the environment has the necessary controls and safeguards in place to keep the organization protected.
So, quick question. This looks pretty advanced. So when we did the initial poll and we saw that we had a lot of people who were just starting out their journey, how would you guys recommend they get started here?
Yeah, sure, Cliff. I'll take that. So I think there's a couple different ways to get started, and I'll talk through 2 of those today where we've seen our clients have success. So the first is using a 5-step process. Typically, the organizations that we see use this, they're acknowledging that their management team wants high confident results, but then they have limited resources to actually achieve those results. Using that risk-based approach, they can be smart about where they're allocating resources for this work. So they start in pass 1 with the risk register, and that's built on underlying laws and regulations that are linked to different risk statements. That helps give a strong foundation with both a risk dimension and then also a compliance dimension that builds the foundation of the program. So then the program is then made up of an applicability matrix in step 2, where you start identifying the different operating environments and you map the risk register with those operating environments to understand which risks are relevant to different applications, your infrastructure, or business processes. And then we move to pass 3, where we dive in on those operating environments to start understanding specific capabilities using easy-to-understand surveys. And they're meant to be rapid. They use questions with yes, no, or unsure responses, and then they provide results quickly. The data in that pass 3, the diagnostics, is still at a lower confidence level, but the diagnostics assessment set us up for passes 4 and 5, where we start focusing on higher risk areas. So in pass 4, we document what controls are and then the effectiveness of those controls in pass 5. It's a classic way to start, and we've seen a lot of clients have success with this. But an alternative way is starting with issues remediation and exception process. We know that not all organizations are ready to change the way that they do upstream risk assessments and their compliance processes, but they can still gain a lot of value by bringing all of their issues together, be it issues from internal audits or external audits, self-assessments, any regulator findings. Putting them all together in one place helps them determine if they're trying to solve and remediate the same problem in different parts of the organization, and it helps them determine if they should focus on remediation activities from the top enterprise level or if they should continue focusing on it at the application or the process level. So really, there's a couple different ways to get started. As long as you're doing it in a smart manner, the two different areas that I've talked through are setting you up for success. And so, Cliff, I know you mentioned earlier that we've worked with a lot of different healthcare clients. We've been engaged with numerous healthcare clients as well as other industries. But from a healthcare perspective, we've developed some unique healthcare offerings that help our clients quickly achieve value. So some of those items are the content, which is the industry-specific laws and regulations that I mentioned before. And those are harmonized and sustained through the regulatory change management application, and then empowered by the evidence warehouse that Gordon demonstrated earlier. We operationalize that with the decision engine, and then we manage it from an insurance perspective using the grievance and compliance issue management. And then we do compliance reporting with the advanced healthcare compliance reporting application, which provides audience-specific reports. So now kind of how does this all fit together from a big picture perspective? So we have our corporate governance and oversight on the top level, which is the laws, regulation, policy, and the different risks. And we push those down through the organization using the business hierarchy. And we also look at it from an asset level through the different applications and the infrastructure. From a bottom-up perspective, we're managing risk and compliance programs. We have our identity and access management programs. We have our vendor risk programs, the resiliency, as well as security operations programs. Each of these teams have interrelations, and the power of them being on a single platform like ServiceNow is huge in that they can ensure their data is of high integrity, they can quickly acquire and analyze data, and then they can better collaborate and coordinate to work through the different issues and activities that come up in the day-to-day activities when they're running their programs. So with that, we wanted to share a few different resources and references that are available when you download the deck. And these will cover some of the areas we've talked about, as well as to help you become familiar with the different services that Edgile offers, as well as to learn more about the ServiceNow IRM capabilities. So Cliff, I will pass it back to you. I think we can step into Q&A.
All right, perfect. So if anybody out there has a question, then feel free to go ahead and throw some out there. We already have a couple. First one is that data warehouse. It does appear that there are some people who are trying to figure out how to store their data for external purposes. So do you guys have anybody using that, or do you recommend using that to actually store your responses for things such as, like, if you had an HHS audit or SEC or et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, it can be used as a content management platform. It's especially ideal when you're starting to respond to those things inside of the platform. So one of the features that I failed to demonstrate there was there's like an enable auditor access button. So a lot of folks are trying to get to that self-serve audit approach to where they can start to mark things as visible to those external auditors or to those folks who are evaluating things. Obviously, you want to control what you're giving access to. So there's a button that's permission restricted to basically say, okay, an outside party or someone with this external auditor role can start to view the contents of this evidence box. So especially if you're trying to manage all of your audits and things through the platform and then transition into that route, that would be an ideal place to put it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree, because a lot of people are even putting themselves in the vendor management piece as a vendor just so that they could have that data handy. So this really solves that issue. Next up is, how frequently are you updating the content that people could purchase from the store?
Yeah, Chris. So we have a quarterly content updates on that. We have a team that's monitoring those different laws and regulations, and as they're changing, we are updating that content source and then pushing that out to our clients that have subscribed to it using the store. We also have a kind of that regulatory change management application that I mentioned that helps clients sustain and apply the different updates. And so what it does is it allows different stakeholders to be engaged and understand the scope of the change of those different regulations so that they can see if they need to update different policies or controls and what that looks like on the assets where those policies and controls actually apply.
That also makes sense. We had another question about what package or SKU the audit management is in, and that SKU is going to wind up being the IRM Pro. Looks like one other question about, this is a pretty long one, so I'm trying to just read and paraphrase it. It talks about basically it's for that risk dashboard scorecard you showed earlier, what would the time to value be to that? So if someone would just get started. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Realistically, you can build that out in roughly 4 to 6 weeks. There's some underlying activities that you have to do and make sure that you're selecting the different, rating the different sources that are a part of that, and making sure that you have the right picture and the right risk ratings for your organization. But yeah, that can stand up in roughly 4 to 6 weeks. It's a pretty quick activity.
All right, perfect. So that is a relatively good thing right there. I think we're pretty solid now there. And it doesn't look to be any other questions. All right, with that, I'll just tell you guys, feel free. We have on-demand webinars available at ServiceNow.com events, and this URL right here. And we have several others here, including many that have been done by Edgile. So please feel free to go check some of these out. And that is that for today. Appreciate your time, everybody.